Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Well, today on the show, we're going to focus on post-emerge weed control in soybeans. And I'm going to throw this out there. We'll call it conventional soybeans. Now, if you have Roundup soybeans and Roundup doesn't work anymore, well, basically you have conventional soybeans too. Let's look at the other aspect. If, let's say, you have any trait out there and you want a tank mix partner, we're going to talk about some products that can be used in any trait for soybeans for post-emerge broadleaf weed control.
Well, I love killing weeds, Brian. I think that's an awesome thing, but I want to talk about fertility a little bit today too, and especially I want to focus on pre-side dress nitrate tests. What can you learn and how can it change your operation?
Coming up later in the show, we've got Iron Talk, we have our Weed of the Week, but first, let's get to our farm basics.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference, because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about old school farming versus new age farming. Well, that's kind of how we like to talk about it quite often, where it's the moldboard plow versus no-till.
Honestly, Brian, it makes me a little uncomfortable even to have the conversation now. I'm not fully employing either of those systems. I like something in between, and I would venture to guess most farmers are somewhere in between, but there are kind of a couple of extremes here where I'm never going to do tillage. I think tillage is always bad, and this is how I'm going to do things, versus, hey, I'm going to do heavy tillage out on the farm. Now, I get concerned about the erosion, Brian. That's why I'm not so big for the heavy tillage.
All right, so we want to talk today just a little bit about what is moldboard plowing and what is no-till. So if you are a non-farmer, you can understand some of the things that we have to work through on the farm. So Darren just brought up soil erosion. If you go back to the 1930s, it was called the Dust Bowl, the Dirty 30s, because the only way to control weeds, insects, and diseases back then, and also to get a good seed bed, was to do massive amounts of tillage. Basically, make the ground black. Well, when you do that, now you're subject to erosion from wind and from rainfall, and that can obviously be problematic. But the thing that I like about moldboard plowing, and what this basically is we're going to take the soil and we're going to really turn it over maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 inches deep. The thing that I like about it is now it is kind of stirring everything around. So if I laid some fertility on top, I laid some manure on top, now I can really get that down into the soil. So I'm excited about that. Also, when you moldboard plow, you're going to warm the soil up a little bit. You're going to speed the mineralization process, so some of your organic matter releases more nutrients for you. In effect, you get some free fertilizer, in the short term anyway. So there are many advantages to moldboard plowing.
Well, on the other side, Brian, let's look at some of the disadvantages. And we mentioned erosion. That's one that if you told me, hey, look, I guarantee you zero erosion off your field, I would be more interested in doing it. But here's some other things that are potentially negative. One is my organic matter levels in my soil are going to go down because I'm going to burn up that residue that much faster. Now, if you say I'm only looking at a 1-year gain, then I'd say, oh, well, then moldboard plowing is great. But if I'm going to farm this ground for the next 20 years, I don't want to do a whole bunch of moldboard plowing. At least I don't want to be doing it every year. So it's something that I'd say, well, maybe I'd consider it once every 5 years or once every 10 years. Well, the other thing is microbes. When we look at the microbes and we look at earthworms, they need a home that's kind of stable. And when you're going to completely disturb that, you could negatively influence what's going on with your microbial life and ultimately your soil health.
Well, you could, but I don't know that in 1 year you're going to change all that much. Now let's talk about no-till. The big advantage is you don't have all this machinery running across the field. You don't have to take the time and the effort to get any work.
And expense.
Right, to get this work done. So that's great. The other thing is, with the soil being left undisturbed, it gives you a better chance to build soil organic matter, and hopefully, to Darren's point, we can improve overall soil health because there are more beneficial microbes and earthworms and everything else that has a nice home.
Absolutely, and potentially we could avoid the compaction, which is another issue by doing heavy tillage.
Yep, but the downside to no-till that I look at is it's very common for people to get their nutrients stratified, so they apply fertilizer or manure on top of the ground and it doesn't go anywhere. So now all of a sudden all their fertility is on top and the roots are down below and they can't get it. Also, when you take a look at this compaction thing that you mentioned, well, if there was compaction going into your no-till and you don't do any tillage, how are you going to bust that compaction up? It usually just stays there and remains a problem for quite a long time unless you make some major changes, throw cover crops in, that kind of thing. The last thing I was going to throw in was your soil is colder. So it's very common to see much slower emergence in those no-till soils. And it's also common to see guys, instead of planting 100-day corn, they plant 95-day corn just to compensate for that.
You can see there's some big advantages and disadvantages of both extremes here that we're talking about, which is why many farmers fall somewhere in between, not doing complete no-till and not doing super deep heavy tillage either. Fortunately, in both of those systems, you can still control our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to do that coming up later in the show.
The Guardian Air Twin Spray Nozzle from Hypro produces a twin spray pattern with air-inducted droplets for superior coverage, even in dense canopies. Be effective and efficient with your spray application this season with the Guardian Air Twin. Hypro, helping you spray better.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference, because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for Springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
When Roundup Ready soybeans came out about 20-25 years ago, it pretty much killed the market for a lot of conventional soybean herbicides that could be used post-emerge. Well, guess what? When Roundup resistance started showing up about 10 years ago, a lot of these herbicides came back. So we're going to talk today about some choices that you can make on your farm for herbicide that can be used in any trait for soybeans or untreated conventional beans. And also these products, many of them can be used as tank mix partners as well. So we want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Let's start with the ALS family of herbicides.
Brian, these products have always been tank mix partners because they've got a narrow spectrum of weeds they're going to control. And you mentioned the ALS products right away. As soon as we say ALS, why are we classifying them as ALS products? Because you're probably getting a trigger going off in your brain saying, wait a second, I've got some ALS resistant weeds. But there are quite a few weeds out there that we are going to control. Let's take the first product, Pursuit, or its really close relative, Raptor. Wow, I mean, here's some great chemistry that back 25 years ago was the lead chemistry across soybean acres because it controlled so many different weeds. Now, it didn't last very long into the 90s before we found water hemp and Palmer pigweed that were resistant to it, but when Pursuit first came out, it was awesome.
All right, so this is where I completely disagree with Darren. He said none of these were standalone products. Pursuit was a standalone product. We didn't advise that, but when that first came out, there were a lot of people that decided, you know what, I'm just going to go Pursuit, and that's my entire program. They did that, and the first couple, 3 years, it worked pretty well. Today, what we usually talk about Pursuit with is low rates because we worry about the carryover. So usually we're talking 2 or 3 ounces instead of the full 4-ounce rate. Also with Pursuit, it carries over more in low pH as opposed to high pH, which is different than a lot of other herbicides out there. With Pursuit, we love it for black nightshade control. Even a half rate usually gives you season-long control. And like Darren said, it does have activity on many other broadleaf weeds as well as a number of other grass species. So the big thing we're worried about here is ALS-resistant weeds. Obviously, it won't control those. But yes, Pursuit does make a nice tank mix partner if it fits in your rotation.
Pursuit's primary competitor way back in the 1990s was a product called First Rate. It's one that still gets used on a lot of acres across the country, especially as a pre-emerge herbicide. This is one of the ingredients in Sonic or Authority First, and that covers a lot of soybean acres across the country, as I mentioned. Why? Because it does provide some broadleaf control, and it also isn't too bad on mare's tail. And so on a lot of the no-till acres, guys like having that in the mix. Now, I'm not going to say it's awesome on mare's tail post-emerge, but pre-emerge is something that can help. Post-emerge it could too, again, if you have a tank mix partner, primarily Fomesifin or Flexstar.
Yeah, but good luck on mare's tail. Most of the mare's tail now is ALS resistant, so I don't view First Rate as a good control product. Same thing with common ragweed and giant ragweed. Some of that's now becoming ALS resistant, not all of it though. And that's the main reason why if you're in states like Minnesota, you probably use a lot of First Rate either pre or post because of the ragweed. So the main thing we're after with First Rate is different ragweed species and then cocklebur, sunflower, and some of the large seeded broadleaves.
Now, back once again in the 1990s, there were some other products called Classic and Pinnacle. They were 2 products that were fairly close relatives, but they controlled some different weed species and often got used together. The Pinnacle portion, or later on named Harmony, was really good on lamb's quarters, where the Classic portion was good on cockleburs and sunflowers.
Okay, so today there are a lot of different Pinnacle products, otherwise known as Harmony. There are a lot of generics out there. Classic also can be used. We worry about Classic carrying over. So in the northern United States where people have higher pH soils, we don't see a lot of Classic used. There is still a lot used as you go south.
All right, we've briefly mentioned some of the PPO family of chemistry, things like Flexstar, Fomesifin, which are really popular products. Also Ultra Blazer and Cobra, and I think it's probably good to look at all 3 of them together and
hey,
say,
don't forget about Cadet too.
Well, that's true, and Cadet, so there's 4 products then. Let's look at them all together because oftentimes you're going to use one of these 4 products for some help on pigweed or some of the other broadleaf weeds.
The big difference between these 4 products is lots of residual with Flexstar, no residual with Cobra. Cadet's going to fall somewhere in between. Ultra Blazer also would have no residual, just like the Cobra. So Cobra and Ultra Blazer on one end, Flexstar on the other. So Flexstar, you really have to be careful where you use it, the rate you use it. It's not even labeled in all areas just because of that carryover potential.
Yeah, with Cobra, this is one that was probably the first one out on the market, and so growers got familiar with it, but they also realized quickly that it does put some burn on the soybean plants. One of the side benefits that we got by using Cobra, in addition to the broadleaf control, was it also helped out on Sclerotinia white mold. Where we used Cobra, we saw less white mold problems, and in fact, in many university trials for the last few decades, they've looked at Sclerotinia white mold control and found Cobra to be, in some cases, even better than some of the fungicides, in other cases, at least competitive with what a fungicide could do.
All right, real quick on Cobra and white mold, use a half rate, like 6 ounces, around June 15th or so, about a week or 2 before the beans are going to flower. That's where you'll get the best response. In terms of weed killing power, with all these PPOs, we're usually focused on a lot of the small seeded broadleaves, things like water hemp and Palmer pigweed especially. Now kochia as well, that is one that people will mention Cobra from time to time. In conventional soybeans, Cobra is the best thing we've got. but Cobra on kochia is maybe 50 or 75% control, that's it. So make sure you've got a great pre-emerge herbicide out there. When we start looking at the other products, yes, I like FlexStar better on water hemp. Cadet and Ultra Blazer probably somewhere in between. I mean, they're okay, just probably not quite as good as FlexStar. And again, FlexStar has the most residual of any of these products.
Yeah, we listed quite a number of products here, and all of them could be used in conventional soybeans. They also could be used as tank mix partners or helpers in a biotech crop like Enlist soybeans or Extend soybeans or Roundup Ready soybeans and so forth. So it's good to know there are some other tools out there that could be used to attack one weed or another in your soybeans this year.
And one of the big questions we've got is, will any of these herbicides control our weed of the week? We'll tell you what will stop this weed coming up later in the show.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Take a look inside any rotary combine, and you'll find single rotor technology. Technology Case IH introduced over 35 years ago with the Axial Flow combine. But unless it gives you more bells and whistles with fewer belts and chains, more power using less fuel, it's not an Axial Flow. Because while the heart of every rotary combine beats red, only Case IH gives you the power to do more.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
How much nitrogen does your crop actually need? Well, it's hard to know what your yield goal is going to be exactly, but what you can determine is how much nitrogen is in the soil right now. The way to do that is with a pre-side dress nitrate test.
When your corn is about 6 to 12 inches tall, we'd encourage you to go out in the field and pull some soil cores, at least from a 0 to 12 inch depth. Find out what's out there and what's pretty highly available for your crop. Now some will say, well, I want to do nitrate tests down 2 feet deep, and you certainly can do that. The question is, are you going to be able to get all that nitrogen in the second foot? Now if you say, we've had some excessive moisture here, I'm really concerned about that, you definitely could pull some deeper samples, but I'd recommend at least doing the 0 to 12 inch profile and getting a good understanding of what's happening.
All right, Darren, talk about how to pull those samples. How would you do it? Where would you pull the cores?
Well, in our 30-inch row corn, I would pick a few different soil types out there, and then I'd go out and pull a soil sample, then move over 3 inches, then go ahead a few steps, then move over 3 inches, and so forth. So you kind of get a sample throughout the zone. That way, if there was any banding, you can kind of take some of that variability out. I like 0 to 12 cores. Once again, it's going to cost you $5 to $10 a sample. It's really no big expense to find out what's out there for nitrogen.
One of the things I like to do is have these samples pulled where I have previous complete soil samples done. The reason why is I want to know what my soil organic matter level is. Here's where I'm going with this. If I have 1% soil organic matter out there, that means it's going to give me almost no free nitrogen during the year. So what I've got in the soil now, it's pretty much what I'm going to have. If I have 7% organic matter, on the other hand, over the course of the season, I could get 150, 200 pounds of free nitrogen coming available. And if it's early in the year, I've got a lot of that to come yet, so maybe I don't need to apply quite as much nitrogen. So this is one of the things I would factor in there.
So when you get your results back from your pre-sidedress nitrate tests, you can look at land-grant universities like Iowa State that have got systems set up to show you, hey, if you pulled this many parts per million, then you should apply this many pounds of nitrogen. And you may look at universities in your area to get a more representative result for you. The other thing that you may be interested in is some of the online modeling that's been done that forecasts, hey, here's how much nitrogen should be left in your soil, and here's how much you should apply. I think those things are great, and it's nice to look at those and compare the results you're getting from your soil.
The big thing we'd really encourage you to do, again though, is make sure you are testing, sampling, and doing some split application of nitrogen. It's the right thing for the environment, it's the right thing for your pocketbook, and it's certainly the right thing for your crop in a lot of cases.
Well, dialing your nitrogen in just right is really important for top yields, but so is controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how to do that coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is wild sunflower.
This used to be one of our worst enemies, Brian. When we were growing up and walking soybean fields, we would pull cockleburrs and sunflowers, and they were completely different plants, even though they looked fairly similar.
Problem with sunflower is it's very competitive because it will get so tall and shade out a lot of crop. So when you look at how much yield even one plant can cost you, it can be a big deal.
Well, back in those days, our hand pulling the weeds was our broadleaf control. Fortunately, there's lots of other things you can do now. So we still want to start with a good pre-emerge herbicide, and some of these broadleaf and grass combo products actually don't do too bad. I like products like Resicor on corn. I think that does a okay job on sunflowers, but it's not going to be perfect. You're still going to have to come back post-emerge. I like the HPPD products there, but if you didn't use the Resicor down. Otherwise, you've got to run with Status, and it works quite well.
Yep, and you know what? Old Bucktril, that works pretty well too, and it doesn't cost much money. Throw a little atrazine with the Bucktril or HPPD or Status, and that will slightly improve the control too.
In wheat, I don't think you're going to get much out of Sharp and Pre, but that would be your best choice. Then post-emerge, I'd come back with Husky.
All right, then we go to soybeans. Lots of options here. Darren, what do you think is best pre?
Well, the 3 Pre program for sure. I would put down a yellow, I'd put down Authority or Valor, and then I'd also put down Metribuzin.
Metribuzin is the only one that'll have activity.
Yeah, the most valuable component there is the Metribuzin. And then post-emerge.
Well, wait though, how about Python? What do you think about Python?
I wouldn't say that's the best on sunflowers.
Not the best, but at least has a little activity.
I would do the Metribuzin, and then post-emerge you've got Liberty, you've got Roundup, you've got Dicamba, you've got 2,4-D, depending on which herbicide tolerant crop you have. The other thing you could do is use the old Pursuit or Raptor or First Rate.
Right.
Those 3 products are really pretty good. First Rate may be the cheapest if you didn't use that in your pre.
And then you could always go with the old Classic, maybe some Harmony together with it. There's lots of options.
Oh boy, there'd be a lot to talk about. But the good thing is with wild sunflower, you can get it under control. Just don't let it rob your yield from your farm this year.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, wild sunflower, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Invisible, invasive, underestimated. Nematodes are stealing over 10% of yields, and current protection methods aren't enough. But a breakthrough seed treatment technology controls nematodes when they attack. Now offering NemaStrike technology. It provides broad spectrum control from the start and stays in the root zone as plants grow. Take back your bushels with NemaStrike technology. Strike where nematodes attack.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us. Because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
Spray drift is always a concern anytime you're going to be making an application. I'll give you 4 keys to manage in today's Iron Talk. Wind is always a factor, but other than not spraying on windy days, there's several things that you can do to get a handle on it. Almost every day has some degree of wind, and even if it's only 3 or 5 miles per hour, it can potentially create issues. First of all, your spray nozzles can make a huge difference, but it's a balancing act. On one hand, you need great coverage with droplets landing all over your target weeds. For that, you'd like a flat fan tip with smaller droplets. However, smaller droplets can blow away easier, so you have to lean more towards a nozzle that makes a coarser and larger droplet with some crop protection products. The height of your spray boom is a second thing, and that can make a big difference too. And honestly, it's the one factor that probably gets missed the most. If your boom is 3 or 4 feet above the crop, you're much more prone to drift. The best recommendation, depending on your tips and spacing, is to have the boom 20 inches above the crop. You still get your full spray pattern and you're least exposed to wind. Faster operating speeds can be and frequently are an issue as well. Now, you want to cover a lot of acres, but running faster leads to more drift potential, so these choices need to be made as well. The guideline is to never run above 15 miles per hour, and if you can go slower than that, it would be even better. Finally, maintain a safe buffer around sensitive crops. With some products like the newer dicamba herbicides, for example, this is right on the label. Play it extra safe, though, on the field borders with wind, spray tips, boom height, and sprayer operation speed. Follow these tips and spray drift can be managed properly on your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but I want to take this opportunity to invite you to attend the Ag PhD Field Day. It's coming up Thursday, July 25th. That's the last Thursday in July, right on our farm near Baltic, South Dakota. Just go to agphd.com to learn more.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.